So differentiation, right? So we talked about the similarity. And the question is differentiation, right? Right. So with respect to differentiation, she uses the term commensurable characteristics, right? Differentiation, according to Rand, the ability to make distinctions in, let's say, the attribute volume, cube, the volume of the cube, right? Rubik's Cube 4x4x4, larger volume than Rubik's Cube 3x3x3. The ability to make this differentiation is itself contingent on what she calls commensurable characteristics. And all commensurable characteristic is a shared or similar attribute, right? So, commensurable is a commensurable characteristic is nothing more than a similar attribute, right? So it's shape, quantity, volume, and so on, right? Two objects having the same shape, analysis. Two objects having the same quantity, analysis. Two objects having the same volume, analysis, right? I'm able to make differentiations. Also, so that's one line. Also, I'm able to look at objects that do not have a similar shape and compare them. Objects that do not have a similar quantity and compare them. Objects that do not have a similar volume and compare them. What we're able to recognize then is that whether they have similar or dissimilar attributes, what we recognize is that we're comparing the same attribute, right? So we don't need to, in a sense, instantiate the difference or similarity to recognize that what we're talking about is the attribute itself, right? So for Rand, we're comparing similar, this idea of commensurable characteristics, right? Characteristics which are commensurable mean that I'm looking at similar things. I'm looking at two things shape, two things volume, and so on. There's a quote that she gives, just to make sense of this. She says, and this is a quote, incommensurable characteristics cannot be integrated into one unit. This is very important, right? Incommensurable characteristics cannot be integrated into one unit. And I think the example that she gives is one of shape and color, right? You can't talk about the unit of, in its most essential, most basic sense of whatever the thing is, and you've incorporated both color and shape into that unit. The unit should be more precise than that. And this is what I was talking about, precision, right? This is a quote from her. This is what she says. Incommensurable characteristics which don't share similar attributes, cannot be integrated into one unit. And that's a quote from Rand. What we recognize then is that we can return to this idea of measurements, right? Similarities in measurement. We recognize that what we're measuring is length in this example. And we can look at differentiations in the process of measurement, right? So that's what we're going to do. So this is differentiation in measurement. Alright, so differentiation in measurement. She doesn't break it down into like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but as I was reading through it, what I wanted to do is I wanted to identify it by steps. This is my interpretation of Rand. Just for a pedagogical process, just so that it's clear how you move from one phase to a next phase to a next phase and so on. Alright, so the first thing, alright? So the first thing, an attribute is isolated in an object, right? An attribute is isolated in an object. It's identified. And I recognize, or in objects, and I recognize that, let's say it's shape, right? And I say that this shape is commensurable, right? So that attributes, attribu, attribute is isolated, right? And we recognize that the isolation of this attribute needs to be commensurable. We're talking about the comparison of shapes, the comparison in quantity, the comparison in length, the comparison in volume, so on and so on and so on. The next thing that happens is that variations in the attribute are identified, right? So variations in the attribute are identified. Why is this important? Well, what I recognize insofar as that variations in the attribute are identified, that this is shorter than this, that this is longer than this. Once I recognize that, then I'm able to see that the attribute, right? And this is all at the perceptual level. I'm not really even, in a sense, cognizant of this. This is a very, she is at a very, very rudimentary stage here, right? I just immediately recognize, oh, that's shorter than that, that's longer than that. It's just a given. I take it in as a given. What I'm able to do is I'm able to recognize that attributes, right? Attributes can differ in its instantiation, for lack of a better term, right? So this is attribute differentiation, right? I recognize this as a given, right? I've isolated an attribute, length. I see that, boom. Okay, I might not call it length. It doesn't matter what you call it. But I recognize that this is, in a sense, longer than this is. This is shorter than that. Then I can get more precise, and I can recognize that the attribute itself has the possibility of having various instantiations. It can differ in how it is represented in an object.